really good to see each of you out this morning for us to have the opportunity to assemble to worship God. It's a blessing to be able to do this. I hope that we never take these opportunities for granted. I know that you all had a good study upstairs with Rusty. Cole led our study downstairs through the book of Jonah, which was a treat for me to sit through and to listen to him do that. So it's been a good morning for us here to be able to study with one another and to be able to pray, to be able to come together and partake of the Lord's Supper, to give, to be able to sing and lift our voice in praise to God, and have this time where we set aside, where we open God's Word together to be able to study from it and to take lessons that hopefully will be a benefit in each of our lives so that we can be more pleasing to God as we leave this place. Have you ever encountered somebody that anytime you seem to have any type of good news, they respond with, well, but? Or they say, well, that's great, but. Have you ever encountered someone like that? I know a lot of times when I worked outside of this, working in a bank, you'd ask somebody, well, how you doing? It's a beautiful day outside. Yeah, it is, but. That's how they would typically respond. And you already know that something negative is about to come out. Yeah, in spite of how nice it is outside, it's kind of cold though. Or, it's a beautiful day outside, but it's a little too sunny. People always seem to have some type of rebuttal at times to what you may be saying. And if you did a poll around the room and you asked each of us, would you rather be around an optimistic person or a pessimistic person? More than likely, we would choose the optimist every time. Now, obviously, I'm going to have a better perception of myself maybe than you do, but I think I'm a pretty optimistic person. I try not to be a pessimist. When somebody tells me something, I try not to look at the negative of it. Sometimes that's a good trait to have. Sometimes it's a bad one. But I've found in my life when I'm pessimistic towards someone, especially when they're excited about something, it can sometimes diminish the zeal that they have. And when you study the Old Testament and you look at the children of Israel, they had a lot of problems. If you've studied the Old Testament at all, you see they have a lot of issues. And Rusty, I know in his class, just got out of chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians when we're going to look at this text as well today. As the Apostle Paul talks and reminisces about the children of Israel, they had a big problem with negativity and complaining. That was really kind of their two big issues that they had. There's a list of sins that Paul talks about over in 1 Corinthians 10 that he highlights that the children of Israel struggled with. If you've read the Old Testament, you know idolatry was a big one. Huge one. A lot of the minor prophets cover idolatry. That's one of the main problems that they had. The prophet Hosea, the whole prophecy that he gives and the indication of his life, he represents God. His wife, who's a harlot, who runs around on him, represents the nation of Israel. We would say, I would never commit idolatry. Ever. I wouldn't do that. I would never commit adultery. That's a big bad one. I would never murder anybody. But this list that Paul gives, as we're going to see in just a second, includes this idea of complaining or negativity. And that's the thing. I've talked to people before, even people that claim to be Christians. And when you tell them that complaining is a sin, they look shocked that it's a problem. What do you mean? I've never heard anybody ever say complaining is a sin. Well, it's mentioned right there in the scriptures to do all things without grumbling or complaining. And God gets agitated with the children of Israel because that's exactly what they do time and time again. But we're not just talking about just blatant negativity today and next week. We could be blinded by it. I have a better perception of myself than maybe you do. And I may say, well, I'm not that negative. But if you're coming up to me telling me things and I'm just, raining on your parade with everything that you say, I'm a negative person. And that negativity affects you. And the saddest part about that is when you think, we as children of God have the most obvious reasons to be optimistic and positive and always look at everything with a purpose and a reasoning because of who God is and what God's plan is for our lives. So as we go through this lesson today and next week, I want you to think about this. If your attitude, which it shouldn't be this way, but it is, if your attitude led someone or hindered someone to Christ this morning, Would you be a hindrance or would you be an aid with your attitude? Now, I'm talking to me first and foremost because I'm not as positive as I should be. Just before services, I was complaining about U of L basketball, right? It's a negativity right now for me. It bothers me. It's hard. We just look at things, and a lot of times I look at something, I just want something to complain about, maybe. I don't need to be that way, especially when we're talking about spiritual things. I don't want to be a hindrance to you. I don't want to hold you back. We can be blinded by our negativity, first off this morning, when our complaints hinder us from being content. I'm telling you right now, I do not have everything I want this morning. I would love to be sitting on a pile of money and not have any worry at all. You may feel the same way. I would love to know that no one in my life is struggling with anything going on. That all their physical infirmities were removed, all the emotional things they're going through removed. I would love for this world to be perfect the way God designed it to be. But I understand that it's not. And I understand I don't have everything I want, but I do understand that I have everything that I need. And a lot of times we have everything that we need because God takes care of us. But instead of focusing on all the blessings that God gives us, we nitpick God for the things He doesn't do, or hasn't done, or won't do, we say. You study the children of Israel, and you read of them in the Old Testament. First off, crying out or grumbling, in a sense, is not necessarily a sin. Because when you look at the beginning of Exodus, what do? They kind of complain to an extent about their situation. God, save us. We're in bondage. We've been here for 400 years. In a sense, they're complaining. We're stuck. Save us. But it wasn't like, oh, God, you can't do that. Or, God, you're just kind of useless and you don't care. It was, we're in this terrible condition, help us. So what does God do? He helps them. He sends Moses. He sends Aaron. The plagues happen. Aaron and Moses lead this nation of Israel out of bondage, out of slavery. They walk free. They see the Red Sea part, which they were complaining before that happened too. But the Red Sea parts, they walk across it on dry land. They're hungry in the wilderness, and God rains manna from the sky for them to eat. Their water is bitter, and God allows that water to be drank where it's no longer bitter. God does thing after thing after thing after thing for them. Answers every need that they possibly have. You know the story. God says, here you go, here's manna from the sky. Here's this water that you need. Here's a promised land that you don't deserve, but I know you're longing for it. But God, we want something else. Israel had a chronic problem with complaining. Idolatry's bad, right? Shouldn't, worship Baal. You shouldn't murder. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't do all those things. But what about complaining? And I want you to read this verse in verses 9 through 10. And I'll go back up even more so as well. Up to verse 6. It's not on the screen of 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Here's what Paul says. Now these things became our example to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So they were after evil things. Nor become idolaters as some of them were, as it is written that people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. I'm not an idolater, I'm not that bad. Verse 8, nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, as in one day 23,000 fell. I'm not sexually immoral, I'm not that bad. And Paul goes through and he recites passages in the Old Testament to say, remember you read this? Remember what they did. Well, then you drop down to verse 9. He says, nor let us tempt Christ as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents, nor complain as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. You think about what they did. They watched the Red Sea part, and they have the audacity to tell Moses that God had brought them out into the wilderness to die. So much so, they would go on to complain and say, well, you should have just left us in Egypt. If I don't recall, at the beginning of Exodus, weren't they crying to leave Egypt? And begging to leave Egypt? Please take us out, God. We cannot live here. We cannot be slaves. We cannot serve these Egyptian people. That's what they did. And that's what he says in verse 10. Nor complain as some of them also complained. Here's what I've got to get. My complaints are directly tied to God, whether I want them to be or not. Because if I'm complaining about my life, who's the one that's blessed me with the life that I have? God has. And when I complain about the way my life is, what I'm in a way saying is, God, you're not doing what you need to do. And you're not taking care of the things that you need to take care of. Now, would I ever utter those words to God? No. But my complaining can be a sign that I really feel that way in my heart. Because you say, well, they just wanted some food. They just wanted some different food. They wanted to change their menu. You know, you get tired of eating the same thing over and over again. But you have to remember, really the complaint is, God, give us something else. God, change this up. I really believe the complaints weren't against Moses and Aaron and weren't against the food and weren't against the water. It was against God. And when you read these texts, these stories, there's a lot of different things that we read of here. But Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 through 6 really is the one that kind of jumps out to me as to how bad this can get, as to really what they were saying to God. It says, now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense cravings. So the children of Israel also wept and said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There's nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. First off, complaining can make you very irrational. Extremely irrational. You think of verse 5. We ate freely in Egypt. Last I recall, you were complaining that you weren't free in Egypt. And that you wanted God to take you out. God does that. But I want to go back to Egypt. I'm telling you right now, Egypt was not better. And when they cried out for food, God sent manna from the sky. And that manna was good enough for a period of time, and then it no longer satisfied. Was the problem the manna? Was the problem God? Absolutely not. The problem was them. God supplied their need, not their want. And they became irrational and said, let us go back to Egypt. And that's the thing. You read the Old Testament. I try to be as patient as I can. And I read this and I'm like, I have no idea how God, that's why he's God and I'm not, could be so patient with these individuals. Because they complain and complain and complain and complain and complain. And you think, you have someone negative in your life. They do not compare to the children of Israel at all. They would complain about everything and everyone. Ask Moses, ask Aaron. So what does God do? You're God. You created everything. You can do as you please. You have mercy on this people, this group of people. You care for them. You love them. They are your chosen people. Well, here's what I have to understand about complaining. And I may not see this now, but one day if I don't correct maybe my negativity this morning, I will learn this a very hard way. God became agitated with their complaints. Can you really blame him? Now, I'll be honest with you. If I'm leading them out of Egypt and they start moaning and groaning at Moses about that Moses had brought them out there to die, I'm probably not going to part the Red Sea for them. That's just my human nature talking. I would say, well, wait a minute. Did you not see all the plagues that just happened? Did you not put the blood on the doorpost? Do you not remember the Passover that I just instituted? You get to the waters and you're complaining to Moses. For 400 years we cried out that you would save us, and now you've let us out here. Take us back. I would be done there. Then you part the Red Sea. They walk across dry land, and they start complaining again, and again, and again, and again and again. Thing is, there's a lot of events that take place before God reaches this point, where God gets harsh with them, and God, it says, is angry with them. In verse 10 of Numbers 11, it says, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused, and Moses was also displeased. So even Moses, as a man, is annoyed. And that's why I said, it says Moses was the meekest man on earth in the time he lived. He really had to be. Because I'll be honest with you, you read the group of people that Moses had to deal with, and it's amazing that he had the patience that he had. And maybe it helped him that he had direct communication with God, because if I was Moses, I would have been using that direct line as much as I could. Pleading with God, give me patience. Help me be merciful like you're merciful. I would have been always going to God, asking God for that. But Moses is displeased. But Moses is a man. It doesn't say that God was displeased. It said the anger of God was greatly aroused. Now think of the anger of God. This is the God that spoke the world into existence. And the God that could literally wipe you off the face of the earth if he chose to. That's the power we're talking about here. And God's upset about the way they've acted and the things that they do. And you're like, yeah, I get the idolatry part. I understand that. I could get the murder part. I could get, the command to rid the promised land of all the heathen people and God being upset that they didn't do that. I can understand that. But complaining, a lot of us don't want to eat the same meal every day. Like from a human, you're like, well, I would kind of get tired of eating manna too. But to God, it just wasn't food. God took personally they were complaining about him. And he was right. And it greatly aroused his anger. Now let's bring this around to 2024 as we stand here. I stand here today. We're here together to worship. My life is a lot better than the children of Israel's life at this period of time. They were nomadic people that in their generation had suffered a lot. I don't have to eat the same thing every day. And I don't have to worry about whether my water is going to be bitter when I take a sip. I have everything that I need. Far more than I need, honestly. So you compare the two. I'm much better off. In a much better place. With a lot less to worry about. And if God was frustrated with them, which technically it's the first day of the week, and we skipped an hour, so you may be able to say no about this next thing I'm going to put up on the screen. But what I really mean is from Sunday to Sunday, have you complained this week? And if you have, I'm not going to hit you in the head because, as I said, I have too. And the thing is it almost becomes second nature to us where we don't even realize that we do it. It's just a natural inclination. And I'm telling you, we live in a messed up society and things need to be corrected and things need to be changed. And I get that. And I think there is justifiable things where things need to be brought up and say, this is not right. This needs to change. This needs to be fixed. I don't think that's complaining. But I'll tell you right now, when it comes to God, I've complained far too much about God than I've ever needed to. And maybe that's just, the immaturity and the lack of wisdom as a younger person of maybe not seeing the bigger picture. And maybe, hopefully, Lord willing, I can develop more of a gratitude for everything that I have and see the benefit of always giving thanks for everything. But none of us are as grateful as we should be. And that's hard to admit. Like, I appreciate God. I appreciate the forgiveness of my sins. But God, can you do this instead? Or change this? Or, you're not giving me what I need. I would never say that about God. We looked last week at the book of Philippians talking about unity. In that book, Paul writes 2 verses that may hit you smack dab in your face this morning like it hits me in mine. Where I need to really focus on this as I leave this place this week with my attitude towards other people, most importantly, my attitude towards God. Verses 14 through 15, do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Paul doesn't say do the comfortable things without grumbling or disputing, or do the nice things without grumbling or disputing. Do all things, he says. And that challenges me. Because even the uncomfortable things, I should do without complaining. Because if you really ever thought about being a Christian this way, if I thought about it like this more often, I think I would appreciate it more. I don't deserve to be a child of God. I don't deserve to stand up here and preach. Don't deserve to be able to ask God to forgive me of my sins. I don't deserve the wife that I have or the home that I live in, my parents. I'll even include the dog. I don't deserve the dog either. I don't deserve anything that I have, to be honest with you. If I really understand that, what do I have to complain about? If you've already given me far more than I deserve, what do I have to complain about? Yeah, things don't work the way I want all the time. Things don't go my way as much as I would like. But at the end of the day, I think I've come out a lot better off than what I deserve. If I tie my complaints to God, it changes everything. Because as children of God, we want to please God. And we want to make God happy. I would never want to upset God or hurt God. That's the main thing, I think, that you see with him getting upset. He was hurt. It bothered him. Because he wants to do everything for us to make our lives better, so that we can spend eternity with him. How much do you think that hurts him to go that far for us and to go that far for them? And the only response is, you're not doing enough. And he's not just doing enough. He's done far more than enough. And when my complaints hinder me from being content about what God's given me, I turn into something that I don't want to be. Life's not always going to be sunshines and rainbows, right? Not always going to smell like a rose. But wow, God's given us so much to be thankful for and to be content about. But negativity can blind us from seeing that. We don't see necessarily what we need to see. And finally, number 2 this morning, really this comes back to God, I believe. But I also think it could be applicable to us as well. Number 2, we are blinded by negativity when our criticism is louder than our compliments. I'll equate this back to prayer. If I'm always praying for God to fix everything and change everything, instead of thanking God for all the things that he's done, my prayers are not the way that they should be. And a lot of people use prayer that way. God fix this, God do this, God do that. But what about all the things God's doing and has already done? There are a lot of people that criticize God. Even Christians that criticize everything that God does. And I'm telling you right now, you may not care about anyone's compliments, and you may not care about kind words, but if you're bombarded with criticism all the time, it gets old after a while, and many of you may know what that's like. Everything you do may be criticized by someone. Someone told me a long time ago, if you're not being criticized, you're probably not living right. I think that's true to an extent. But the thing is, it's like I can control that. Like I can bite my tongue. I can watch what I say. Because you don't know how weak someone may be, and I don't mean that in a bad way, or how fragile someone may be. Someone may have this zeal to do something, they tell you about it, and then you say, well, you're just being unrealistic, you don't know what you're talking about. Imagine how that affects that person's confidence. How about this? Imagine the positive message of the gospel being drowned out by my negativity. Become a child of God. My life is terrible. Right? That's not going to preach to anybody. Become a child of God. All your sins will be forgiven even though my life's terrible. Become a child of God. Everything will be better except my life. Imagine how that would sound to someone else. And you would say, I don't want to be like that person. I can live however I want and not feel that bad. But see, that's what we see in life a lot of times. People are like, well, no one responds to the gospel anymore. Maybe it's because of the messenger, not the message. Children of Israel didn't convert a lot of people and didn't change the other nations because they weren't what they were supposed to be. Who wants to deal with a God if you've always got a problem with everything? He's supposed to be the one who helps you, not the one who hinders you like they oftentimes said. But it got me thinking, why do people criticize? Constructive criticism, right? We're not talking about that. Constructive criticism is a lot of times designed to help you. You know, if I tell you I'm going to drive my car 120 miles an hour down the Waterston Expressway and you say, that's a bad idea. That's not you criticizing me to make me feel bad. That's you telling me, hey, that's not a good idea. It's not good for you. But one of the main reasons I found, even studying the scripture, that criticism is evident is because of a lack of influence that someone has on someone else. If I tear you down, you are weaker than I am. Therefore, I can influence you with the decisions you're going to make. Follow me here. What do politicians oftentimes do? Criticize each other, the citizens, other people. Why? To gather influence. What did the Pharisees do? They criticized Jesus. Why? To manipulate the people. And I'm telling you, it's kind of hard to criticize Jesus. He didn't do anything wrong. But guess what? They were still negative and still did it anyway. There's an obscure story over in the scriptures that, reading about this week, I'm like, wow. I've read the book of Mark obviously before, but sometimes you read through and, maybe you don't stop and pay attention as much as you should. There's a story over in Mark chapter 9, verses 38 through 40, where the apostles criticize someone who's not in the group, someone who's not following Jesus with them. They're not actively a participant in their ministry. And look what they do to this individual in verses 38 through 40. It says, "Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us." He's not one of us. Jesus said, "Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me, for he who is not against us is on our side." So you're like, well, that's weird. Why would you bring that up? Well, what are the apostles doing? He's not one of us, so he shouldn't be doing it. Jesus says, leave him alone. If he does it in my name, he's not going to turn against us. What's the point of that? Even Jesus' disciples, his apostles, criticized other people in his presence. Why are you talking to this person? Teacher, why are you messing with this individual? What do the Pharisees say? Why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? If Jesus can be criticized, so can me and you. But my criticism should never be about gaining influence over you. It should be designed to help you. Which leads us to, I'm going to kind of rapid fire some verses to close this morning. But if you take this principle of criticism being because of a lack of influence, a lot of people tear down, tear down, tear down, tear down, tear down. I think there's a time and place to tear down sin, to tear down sinful behavior. But tearing down an individual time after time after time after time weighs on that person. So let's say this morning I'm going to criticize something you're doing. Here's my question. Why am I doing it? For what purpose am I doing it? Is it to help you be right with God? Or is it to make me feel better? One of the main functions of the church is edification. Building up, lifting up, helping someone grow closer to God. And this morning we have a choice to make, as we're going to talk next week as well. We have a choice to make of what we will decide to do. So this morning, are my criticisms or my edification louder? Think about that. You may have heard the old saying, the loudest person in the room isn't always the right one. And I think that's true. You can yell and you can scream and you can get as nasty as you want. It's not going to make you right. And just like James talks about, the power of the tongue, how it's so hard for any of us to master it. Think of that balance. I can build you up, or I can tear you down. I can lead you closer to God, or I can distance you from Him. We can't do miracles. I can't speak in tongues. I don't have the gift of prophecy that we read of in the Old Testament, and even the gifts that were present in the New Testament. I don't have that power. But boy, we have a lot more power than sometimes we want to admit. I'll rapid fire these verses for you. Romans chapter 15 and verse 2. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. For his good. Not for his bad, not to make him feel bad, not to step on him, not to kick him when he's down. None of that. For his edification, for his good. So ask yourself when you open your mouth this week, whether it's to your spouse, your kids, your neighbor, whoever it is, your coworker, is this edifying and good for this person? And if it's not, maybe I don't need to say it. Notice I didn't say you, me. Maybe I don't need to say it. Maybe I need to bite that tongue a little bit harder. Because you know as well as I do, when it comes out, you can't get it back. And in this context, we're not talking about just anybody. We're talking about Christians here. Let us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 26, how is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification. All these things are positive. Each of you has a psalm. Each of you has a teaching. Each of you has a tongue. Each of you has a revelation. Each of you has an interpretation. All these things are positive. But what's the point of all of it? To edify. To build up. You think about that. Everything I do should be designed, number one, to praise God, but number two, edify the people around me. You know, you may be struggling with something in your life that's really difficult, and you may be on the verge of a breakdown. The last thing you need to hear is about how negative I am. Because someone has it a lot worse than I do somewhere. Maybe even someone in my own life. Everything I do should be done for edification, to build you up, to lift you up, to most importantly lift God up. Can you imagine how that makes someone else feel when we do that? Or Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, this is a really hard one, I think. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for a necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. He doesn't say don't let a few corrupt words come out of your mouth. Don't let any. You people, oh, that's he's just talking about cuss words. That's not just what he's talking about. You can let corrupt words come out of your mouth, and they're not a cuss word. And you think about that. You have the ability to build up or tear down, but you also have the ability to grow someone with your mouth and also corrupt someone with your mouth. You know, if I'm just like dogging you about everything that you do, you're just this ineffective person that has no business doing anything. I can't believe that you would do that. You're just this terrible individual. You know, you come to me, hey, I'm struggling with this. Well, get over it. You'll figure it out. If that's the attitude I always have, just imagine how that affects other people. And you say, well, I don't really have that much of an effect on someone else. Imagine if someone did that to you. And if you've lived long enough, you've had someone do that to you. Maybe they purposely try to tear you down. Maybe they try to hurt you on purpose. Maybe they try to diminish your zeal because they don't have it, but you do. Maybe you have a joyful life that you are so happy of what the Lord has done, but someone comes along and says, no, you don't really have it all that good. You say, what possibly makes someone be that way? I'll tell you right now. It's because they don't have the peace and the joy that comes from knowing Jesus Christ. And that's the thing about it being sneaky or blinding. I may be that way and not know it. But if someone loves me enough to say, hey man, what's wrong with you? Why are you being so negative all the time? And people have said that to me before, and you're like, I'm not negative. And you're being negative right back about being negative. No. The hearer gets grace. The hearer gets edification. The hearer gets what they need. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 at verse 11 to close this morning. Therefore, comfort each other and edify one another just as you also are doing. A lot of these epistles Paul writes, as Rusty's taken us through a few of them. Paul will write, and it's like, you got this problem, you got this problem, and you got this problem. It's kind of nice to read one where he's like, keep doing what you're doing. Keep edifying one another. Keep comforting each other. You think about it. Someone comes to you with something they're struggling with. Bad. Difficult. And you blow them off. They must have thought that you cared. But you show that you don't. And then what we were put here to do is this calling of being a child of God. I love God with all my heart, my soul, and my mind. I love my neighbors myself. I wouldn't want someone to blow off my concerns or my pain or my hurt. Comfort. Have you ever met somebody that's just a comforting person? I have a lot of people in my life that I would describe that way. Just being around them kind of comforts you. You know, you may have people that you've had in your life that are no longer here that were kind of like that person. There's definitely one that comes to my mind, and many of you know who that probably was. A comforting person that you could always go to and know that they care. We may never find that fully here, but God cares. And what are we comforting and edifying each other in? God. There is no comfort without God. There is no edification without God. But God's not here to speak like we speak to each other, or touch us like we can touch each other, or embrace us like we can embrace each other. He's not here to do that. You know, there's even a hymn. Christ has no feet but our feet. Christ has no hands but our hands. Christ, in a sense, has no mouth. Obviously, the Word of God has revealed what God wants, but we speak that to each other. We lift each other up. And I'm telling you right now, if we're a congregation that's constantly doing that, I mean, I'm talking about just being kind of obnoxiously optimistic. Not where it's unrealistic, but we're constantly trying to spur each other on. We're constantly trying to encourage each other. We're constantly trying to pick each other up. Imagine the good that would do. Imagine how your friends and family would see you differently. Imagine how differently your coworkers would see you. And imagine the peace you would feel in your life knowing that you have all the reasons to feel that way. Remember what the Apostle Paul said over in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Don't be like the children of Israel. Don't be like them. There's a lot of things they did wrong. Complaining is probably near the top of that list. And this morning, all of us here, I believe, are children of God. So we all know what we had to do in order to be saved. And we knew the reason of why. Like, I didn't decide to become a child of God because, hey, I got it all figured out. Like, I know everything that I need to know, and I'm self-sufficient. I realized that I wasn't self-sufficient. I realized that the whole of sin is the worst predicament I could possibly ever be in. We all did. That's why we need salvation. Now follow me here. If sin is being stuck in your sin is the worst predicament that you could possibly ever be in, Now imagine how you feel once you've believed, repented, confessed, and been immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins, and you're out of that pit. Children of Israel, right? Egypt was kind of like that pit. Oh, send us back to Egypt. It was so much better in Egypt. God, you brought us out here to die. God doesn't pull you out of the pit to throw you back in the pit. God doesn't pull you out of the pit for you to go back to the pit and want to go back to the pit. God pulls you out of the pit because being in the pit is not good. It's not good for us. And I'm telling you right now, I could be as negative as I wanted to be in that time. Because it was my own fault. But what God did for me by pulling me out of that pit of sin, I have every reason to be this positive, upbeat, optimistic person because I didn't do any of that. God did. Let's say we do this. If you lost your home, if you lost your family, if you lost the very clothes on your back, the car you drove in, if you lost your health like Job did, if you lost all the things that we thank the good Lord above for each and every day, and all he ever gave you was Jesus Christ, you would still have every reason to be optimistic, and every reason to be positive, and every reason to be joyful. Health's nice. People are nice. Possessions are nice. But maybe just like the children of Israel, I forgot what I really, really needed. And that God gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it. That's a challenge. Next week we're going to cover it more, so hopefully you'll be ready. Hopefully we don't have like bulletin board material we can go through and say, well, I messed up here, 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 and here. Hopefully this challenges all of us to be more optimistic. There are people watching us, the influence we have on others. They're watching how we react. And I want to be the best light that I can be to those around me. And I think that a lot of that starts with my attitude. So will we criticize this week or will we edify? Will we remember what we have, what the good Lord has done for us? Or will we wish that we had more and more and more? The choice is ours this morning. Let's be that light as we go out into the world to all around us. If you need to respond to the invitation in any way this morning, would you come forward now together as we stand and sing?